Hi guys, I'm Kristen. This is Kristen is Fully Booked, and today I'm going to be doing a review for Adrienne Young's adult debut, Spells for Forgetting. First things first, thank you to NetGalley and Random House or Delacour Press for the advanced e-copy of this book. So I have been a pretty big Adrienne Young fan for the past couple of years now since I discovered the Fable series, and I went back and read all of her back catalog, and she rapidly became a auto-read author for me. I was particularly excited to find out that she was releasing an adult debut book this year, and it was definitely one of the most anticipated books on my radar for this year. This is going to be a non-spoiler review, but if you want to go into reading this book knowing absolutely nothing, then of course click away, finish this video another time after you've read the book to see if you disagree or agree with the opinions that I have. I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that I think worked really, really well in this book, and then some of the cons of things that I think didn't work quite as well. And I am also going to do my always should you read or who should read this book at the end of my review. There is one particular quote going around quite a bit for this book, so I will share that with you now, and that is, "There are spells for breaking and spells for mending, but there are no spells for forgetting." This is a very complicated genre book. It's a little bit difficult to describe because it doesn't quite fit into any one particular category. I think it was just categorized as general adult fiction. It has a little bit of magic in it, which Adrienne Young actually described as sort of peripheral magic, and I'll talk about that in a bit. It also has a little bit of a murder mystery, and it's very atmospheric. I think some people are going to call this contemporary fantasy. Some people are just going to call this contemporary. Some people are going to call this murder mystery. I saw someone say thriller. I definitely don't go into this expecting a thriller. There are some thriller elements though, but it's like a lot of these little things tied in together, and that makes it really hard to pin down. There is also a little bit of discourse about, in their advanced reviews, about whether or not this feels like an adult book or a young adult book. And it definitely is difficult, I think, and there are a lot of examples of, or poor examples of, authors going from young adult writing to adult writing and not quite successfully making that jump. I'll say that I feel pretty neutral about whether or not this is adult versus young adult. There's no overly explicit content. There is definitely like a murder discussed. There is some graphic things discussed. There are some sex scenes, but they're not overtly sexual. They are more descriptive in feeling than they are in content and what exactly is specifically happening. I feel like this could work though for a lot of young adult readers as well. I don't think that there's anything that would particularly turn them away. If you're a reader who reads both adult books and young adult books, then you're going to have no problem with this book. If you are a reader that reads exclusively adult content and never reads YA, you might feel that this feels a little bit younger compared to some of what you read. But if you read exclusively YA, this might feel a little bit older. That's kind of where I would put it. Now, the synopsis for this book had me really excited. We are following August, Salt, and Emery Blackwood. This book does take place in our own world, but it takes place on a fictional island called Saoirse Island off the coast of Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. The premise or the setup for this book is that August Salt is returning back to this island after 14 years being away to bury the ashes of his mother after being essentially run out of town after he was suspected of killing one of the other teenagers, Lily something, I'm forgetting her last name. August and Emery were teenage loves, and it is Emery's best friend, Lily, whose body was found at the time of this orchard burning. August and Emery are definitely our main characters, and we spend the majority of the time through their perspectives, but we do get occasional other perspectives of other town members, as well as occasional flashbacks to what happened in the past. Structurally, there is much more time spent on the current time period, and the flashbacks don't necessarily take place in a chronological order. It's not like retelling that in snippets, like in a back and forth way. It's more just showing you past events to fill in the feeling, to fill in some secrets, to get a sense of the relationship, the dynamic, the town dynamics, and things like that. Honestly, this book is the perfect book to read in the fall. I am now convinced that Adrienne Young is just the master of atmospheric writing. She can depict a scene and a setting and a feel and a vibe through her writing, through the imagery that's used, but there's something about the quality of her writing that completely immerses you in the feeling of what is happening. And the atmosphere that she evokes in this book is so like what you would describe as fall vibes, not necessarily cozy fall vibes, but more misty, dark, ominous, small town, secrets, eerie. There's the murder mystery. There's like really complicated personal dynamics and relationships. There's like heart-wrenching angst and all of that. Definitely the island itself, the setting, like really adds to the feeling of the atmosphere here, particularly the way that she writes it and the way that she kind of incorporates what she calls this peripheral magic, which is the idea that the townspeople are just really tuned in to the feeling of the island. There is a line in there about there being no coincidences on this Saoirse Island, and it's just that like the townspeople read into everything that happens on the island, like weird weather events, a particular type of bird hitting a window. There's a lot of like images with these starlings and like the townspeople, or particularly Emery, reading into things that starlings are doing, and same with like the trees or the weather and the leaves changing or the leaves falling, like all of that. They're very tuned in and they read into those things that are happening, those events, as like omens and what that means to them. And on top of that, then you also have this idea that the townspeople are still a little bit into folklore hearth magic, sort of. Particularly the women are described as being like a little bit witchy. They are described as having like a little bit of magic, but it's not in a way that feels over dramatic or even like magical. It's more like a question mark of, is there magic, isn't there magic? And I'll say that there is like a little bit of a asterisk here that had to do with the ending that I don't think worked well if you interpret things as having question marks along the way. But ultimately, if you are looking to immerse yourself in something that just screams fall and like mist, like if you want to put yourself on a misty island in the Pacific Northwest with this like eerie murder mystery, dark folklore, mystic kind of a setting going on, like read this book. That is what it does so well. I will say that Adrienne Young always has a corresponding playlist on Spotify. The quality and the tone of the music on the playlist is so very clearly the atmosphere and the vibe that she creates in her book, like in the book itself. So if you are into that, absolutely check this out. It's so clear that that is the music that she is listening to, that is the music that she is like picturing in her mind, playing in the background while she is writing those scenes, or at least that's how I'm picturing this. And it was absolutely like the soundtrack that I'm picturing in what could so readily be a TV miniseries, I think. Like, I don't necessarily would work as a movie. I think like a short 6 to 8 episode miniseries, I could picture that so clearly. And that's the quality to her writing is such that you can so vividly picture things happening and get that sense of feeling. So, like 1000%, that is the strength of this particular book and the strength of Adrienne Young herself. While saying the praises for the atmosphere, I will just kind of continue on with all of the positives, and then I'll skip to or switch over to more of the negatives. So some other things that I think worked really well in this was drawing the reader into the book right away. You immediately get hooked in, not just to the setting, obviously, although like, yes, strong vibes on that, but there is a way in which the events at the beginning begin to unfold, with August arriving and Emery hearing that he's arrived, or Emery seeing him for the first time and him seeing her for the first time, and the perspectives for that, and small little secrets or people saying things vaguely in a oblique way referencing the murder or the death of Lily in the past. All of that, it really draws the reader in right away. So I think that was really effective. I also think that the emotionality of the book was quite good in certain regards. I think the dynamic between August and Emery was written very well. Like, it is a very strong emotional connection between those two. It's one of those like relationships where that almost is that their whole personality, and there's a little bit of a con there as well that I'll talk about with characterization in the book. The sense of like them needing each other and not really knowing how to exist without the other, and the impact that the 14-year separation or like distance had on them was very real and intense, and you could feel it. There are certain reveals or secrets that happen along the way, that the emotion that you feel discovering that reveal, discovering that secret with Emery or with August, is really intense. And I've had similar experiences with Adrienne Young's writing before, where she can really write you emotionally into that feeling. Sometimes I almost think that she jumps out of that feeling a little bit too quickly, where like I want to be angry with the character for longer than the character is, like, because I'm so riled up about what was revealed and so intense that I think that the character skips past it, or there's so many other things going on that we don't have enough time to like spend like really there being like enraged with the character in the way that I want them to. I also think she really nailed the small town dynamic at play here. This is a very small town where everybody knows everyone's secrets. Everybody has dark secrets. Should everyone in this book have been imprisoned? Maybe. And the point was made that this town would only exist, or can only exist, because of certain tourist draws. And those tourist draws are quite significant. And I think someone coming from a larger city might not understand the impact that, say, mostly it's this orchard, that something like that would have on the town, and why the orchard itself plays such a significant draw and such a significant role in the book, and in a variety of capacities. But I think unless you've been to a small town where it's like the small town will die in the winter, no one could survive there, in a sense of people wouldn't have jobs, people wouldn't have income without the money that you make in the high season because of that particular tourist draw. And so she totally sold me on that. The small town secrets dynamic as well, I think she got really well, where it's like everybody getting in each other's business, everyone having those dark secrets, a little bit of like casual blackmail going on in that sense, and just the way that people like view outsiders, and they view people who leave, or they have this intense strong connection to where they're from. She did that absolutely beautifully. Now I'll talk a little bit more about like I think maybe like neutral things before getting into like totally negatives. I think neutrally I feel about the murder mystery element of this. Definitely what is shaping this is the past event of 14 years ago. There was a fire at the apple orchard that again plays a huge role in this town. It kind of like drives the economy of the town. And right after the fire, they found a body, not a burned body, totally separate, but it's just at the same timing, they found the dead body of Lily, who was a pretty, eminent local girl in the town and Emery's best friend. August was immediately a suspect for this, for reasons that you'll discover in the book. There was never enough evidence to charge him, but the town essentially immediately decides that he must have done it. And because of that, even though he's never charged, and it's such a small town, he and his mother are essentially run out of town, because he cannot continue to exist in a place that is so determined and so convinced that he murdered this young girl. And so him showing back up after 14 years obviously brings out a lot of emotions in a lot of different people. But I would say the actual the murder mystery of what happened to Lily all of those years ago was only okay. I think that there were times that I absolutely was certain that I knew what had happened. And I won't say that I was always right, but I think I was right some of the time, and sometimes there were twists and reveals that got me sucked back into it. But there was definitely a period in the middle of the book where A, I feel like the pacing lagged a little bit, and B, I felt like it became really obvious what happened. And I won't say whether or not it was or wasn't really obvious what happened, but it felt that way. And so then you sort of start lagging in your interest a little bit during that particular period of time. I think if you're someone who is very familiar, if you read a lot of murder mysteries, a lot of small town drama murder mysteries in particular, I think that this would probably not grip you in that sense. I don't think it'll be that surprising what it is that happened, or the elements at play, let's say. I think that those are probably familiar to people who do read a lot of murder mysteries. And then I think some of the things that didn't quite work or weren't as much of a success in this book, we'll start with the characterization. I mentioned before briefly that it felt a little bit like Emery and August's whole personalities were their relationship, and I think that's kind of the case. Like, on one hand, it felt really, really strong as a positive note on the writing for the relationship dynamic. On a negative, it didn't really leave much to understand of who August and Emery were as people. August, maybe a little bit more. There were some things in August's history that helped to fill in a little bit more of that, but I definitely don't feel like, while the relationship stuck with me, I don't feel like these are characters that stick with me, because there was nothing else going on with them other than the intense relationship that they had and the murder of Lily and like what happened and all of that. I do put that in as a little bit of a negative, where I don't feel like they were like fully realized people outside of their relationship. And maybe there just wasn't time for that in this book. But it did definitely, I would put that as like a little bit of a con or a little bit of a negative. I also feel like the ending felt a little bit rushed, or it left me feeling like a little bit unsatisfied. And I can't really go into a lot of detail on why I felt that way, because it definitely would spoil, the ending itself. So I'll just say that, like, I don't feel like everyone got what was coming to them. Maybe that's too spoilery. I think that the final, like all of the final reveals, or how everything was revealed right at the very end, happened pretty quickly in like a dramatic way, but like I think too quickly, on how sort of the final showdown happened and then how it unraveled, or how it wrapped up, I guess is the better way. That was just a little bit quick for me, like a little bit of a quick turnaround. I almost would have wanted to like sit and stew in the fallout quite a bit more, based on the intensity of the feelings and the intensity of the what happened and the reveals, as well as how the reveals affected or would affect the particular relationship dynamics between certain characters and many other characters at play here. Like, I think she did a really good job of explaining and showing you the complicated relationships of how everyone tied together, and particularly how they all tied to Emery. And she did a really good job of that in the first part of the book, or like through the majority of the book. But just how that all wrapped up at the ending was almost totally forgotten about. Like, I never got like a final discussion with Emery or her and certain people. We just don't get like a resolution. And not even like, I don't need like a satisfying everything worked out perfectly kind of a resolution, but just even how Emery felt about how she resolved her feelings on some of the things that were revealed. I'll finish off with some comparisons that might interest you, as well as a little bit of like who should read this, so I think will play in with the comparisons. So if you are looking for something that just feels like fall, then this is that book, right? This is not maybe not the best murder mystery. This is not, it has romance, but it's not, the most intense focus on a romance. But if you want something that just screams fall and that's going to put you in that fall eerie mood, this is that book. The mood of this book is fall. If that's what you're looking for, read this book. You will probably have a decent time with it. And if you like Adrienne Young in particular already, you'll probably have a very good time with it if you like her writing. If you are an atmospheric reader, like if you want to, if you like beautiful atmospheric writing, this is also that book. If you like witchy adjacent, kind of more hearth magic-y, herb lore, that kind of stuff, read this book. Some comparisons that I think I mentioned really briefly in my end of the year video as well, when I mentioned Spells for Forgetting, but if you watched first season of Riverdale, I think that there are some pretty decent comparisons here between the two. It definitely had a very similar feeling, but take out all of the, like, I don't know that it was CW, because I don't think CW still exists, but like take out the teenage drama and the high school stuff, and I think like the murder mystery small town atmosphere and that element of the first season of the show Riverdale, I think is a pretty good comparison here. It's almost like that murder mystery that happened with the boy in Riverdale, but then like let the players come back 15 years in the future to talk about it and to figure out what happened. I also think that there's some decent comparisons to make here to Veronica Mars, first season again of Veronica Mars. Again, it has to do with like, the death of a best friend, the murder or unsolved murder of a best friend. There's not like the detective stuff going on, but I think that there are some elements there that if you liked first season Veronica Mars for the like whodunit components, then you will probably like that element of this book as well. And I think it's like, I hope it's a coincidence that the main character, or the girl that died in Veronica Mars, was named Lily, and the girl that died in this book was also named Lily. I'd like, who knows? I think Adrienne Young has watched Veronica Mars. This is how I'm going to phrase that. I think that's probably the case. Another comparison that I want to make where I think that this one worked better is the book A River Enchanted. A River Enchanted also had like an island where the island was sort of magical and there was like, you know, folklore-y stuff, mystic like spirits involved in there. Now that one was definitely fantasy. It was a fantasy book, whereas this one is like, is it fantasy? But what I was going to say is that in that book, when I read it, I felt like it was fairly atmospheric. I knew that the author wanted it to be atmospheric, and I felt like I could tell the vibe that she was trying to go for, but I didn't quite feel like they succeeded in really capturing the feeling or making me feel immersed in the feeling of that magical island, whereas that is what Adrienne Young absolutely nailed with this book. So if you noticed that, or if you enjoyed that and you wanted even more, this is a book to check out. I don't think you should read this book if you are a murder mystery reader. Like if you pick this up because you hear it's a thriller, because you hear that it's a murder mystery, this might not totally work for you. I think that it probably has some well-known tropes or beats along the way. I don't know that for a fact, but based on the reviews that I have read and just based on my own reading through that and not being a murder mystery reader, I think that probably murder mystery readers or heavily or exclusively murder mystery readers are probably not going to jive with this quite as well. And again, I think if you are an adult fantasy reader, like an adult contemporary reader who exclusively reads that, this might read a little bit younger for you. Even if I don't personally think it reads young adult, I do think it is more aged up than young adult, but it might feel slightly younger than what you're used to if you read exclusively adult books. Okay, I think that's everything that I wanted to say about this book. I did really enjoy this book. Like, I absolutely loved the experience of reading this book. There was a pretty significant portion of this book too where I felt like this is my favorite book of the year. I don't think it ended that way. That's not how I felt by the ending of the book per se, but I was really drawn in and I was quite captivated by the book the entire time that I was reading it. I just think that it had a little bit of, not forgettability, absolutely not. Like I can vividly think and picture everything that happened because she's so good at that part of the writing, but just the story itself didn't stick with me, and the characters in particular didn't stick with me in quite the way that I was expecting based on how intense I felt about it while I was reading it. Have you read Spells for Forgetting, or are you planning on picking it up? Let me know down below. I'm really curious to see what other people think about this. I think this is going to be like, not necessarily a divisive book, but I think people are either going to feel meh about it or they're really going to love it. Anyway, that's it for me today, guys. I will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.